I had no charts. I had no audio. I had no set list. And we had no rehearsal.
Hello and welcome to the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players. My name's David Holloway and I'm thrilled as always to be here with you. And I'm also thrilled to be introducing to you this episode, Mr. David Ryshpan. As you'll hear during the coming hour or so, David has had one of the most fascinating, multinational, multicultural careers that we've heard about to date. We cover a lot of ground from Canada to South America and particularly Brazil, through to Japan and China. It's just an absolutely fascinating insight into living a musical life that involves lots of variety and lots of tests of skills. And David's an example of how he's passed that with flying colours. So I'll shut up and let you jump into this, and I'll talk to you after the show. David, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, sir. Can't thank you enough.
Yes, thank you for having me, Dave.
And as far as I'm concerned, you can never have enough Daves. And I'm actually wondering across all of our episodes whether David is the most common name we've had on the show, because we've had a few.
I don't know in this podcast if that's the case, but I have realized that in Montreal anyway, at least in like the global music community, world music community in Montreal, every keyboard player is named David. There's like 6 of us.
That's excellent.
To the point where I have been called by someone looking for a different keyboard playing David.
There you go. Yeah, it's funny. Because I'm just trying to think, we've had David Rosenthal, yourself, Dave Ross Cohen, Dave Bryce. We've had quite a few.
Yeah.
Anyway, no, great to have you here. And look, you just mentioned the world music community, and I'm really excited to talk with you about a range of projects, and we're certainly going to get onto that. But I thought I'd start with your musical upbringing, particularly around, I know in your biography, you mentioned that from as early as 14, you were playing solo matinee gigs, I'm assuming, was it at a hotel? The Rex was a hotel or a club?
No, well, it's both. The Rex is a jazz club in Toronto, and it started as a hotel. Now, at the time when I started playing there, the hotel was, I think, decommissioned, and it was just the club. But in the past 10 or 15 years, they've actually renovated the hotel, so you can stay there again. So it's actually both, but the place where I was playing was the club.
The club. And so tell us your early childhood years that led you to being able to pull that off at age 14.
So I started... my first musical memory, I guess, was when I was 3 years old, and a babysitter came over and had a cassette tape of Billy Joel's 52nd Street. And I just became obsessed with that album. She came over the week after, and I was like, "Do you have that tape?" And I knew all the songs. I knew everything front to back. My parents aren't musical, but they had a family friend who ran a music shop. And I think if my memory serves, he had some kind of connection to Boosey and Hawkes in the UK, because he was British. Okay. And he had, I don't remember, it's, quite a while ago. I don't remember what his affiliation with Boosey and Hawkes was, but I remember going over to their house when I was quite young, like 4 or 5. And just, they had an upright piano, and I would bang on that as kids do. And, he saw that I had a passion for music and an inclination towards music. And I remember he gave me like a bunch of mouthpieces for different instruments just to see like what embouchure I would wind up gravitating towards. And even though my parents weren't musical, radio was always on in the house. And also I was born in 1985. So I'm part of that generation where, all those studies were starting to come out of like, play your kids Mozart and make them learn violin. It'll make them smarter and everything. So I actually started on violin at the age of 3. I stuck it out for about a year or so, switched teachers because, they were trying to make me, before I could play a note of music, they wanted me to hold like a Kleenex box with a ruler at the end of it just to get that, get the physicality of it happening. And I was just not having it. I was motivated by music, even at that young of an age, at that early age. So I just wanted to play music. If I didn't have the technique, whatever, I just wanted to be making music, playing music. And then I took one guitar lesson at around the age of 4 or 5, and it wasn't a good fit with the teacher. And so I stopped playing guitar. And then for my 6th birthday, I asked for a piano. And my parents were like, okay, well, we're not going to buy an actual piano because if he quits, that's quite an investment. So they bought me a little Kawaii arranger keyboard that came with stickers for the note names. That was it. That was the instrument that I connected with. They actually had to ask me to stop practicing to do my other homework. And so that was that. I was just connected to piano, and then we had learned from the mistakes of the past where, I wanted to, that type of keyboard at the time, there was like a whole series of like super easy piano books that came with like, you press this rhythm combination and use this sound, and they had the note names in the note heads and everything. And so I had a bunch of those books because my parents were playing Billy Joel and Elton John and the oldies radio and whatever around the house. And so I just knew like that's what I wanted to play. I didn't have any interest in learning classical music. I didn't want to go through, I don't know what the equivalent is in Australia, but in Canada, it's like the Alfred's books for kids.
Yeah.
And then there's also the Royal Conservatory of Music system, the exam system, and the grading system. I wanted none of that. I just wanted to be playing music. And so they looked around for a teacher who would teach a 6-year-old kid, not out of kind of the standard pedagogy, but teach me what I wanted to be learning and make sure I had all the theory and technique and harmony, but using whatever, Elton John instead of, Mary Had a Little Lamb or whatever. And then around the age of 9, the teacher I was studying with, I don't know how I had read the name Louis Armstrong before, but I had already heard of Louis Armstrong. I think just I had a book, like a kid's book about like legends of music or something. And that name stuck out, like Louis Armstrong, Satchmo. And I saw as I was leaving my lesson that in her CD rack, she had some kind of Louis Armstrong's greatest hits CD. And I was like, do you mind if I borrow that for the week and I'll bring it back next week at my class? And she looked at me like I had 3 heads of like, what does this 9-year-old want with a Louis Armstrong CD? So I borrowed it. I put it in the CD player when I got home, and it was over. It was like, I don't know what you call this music. I don't know what this is. I don't know how to do it, but this is what I want to do. And so I went back the next week and I was like, can we work on like kind of some Louis Armstrong stuff? Like, and then that's how I got into jazz at the age of 9. And then for my 10th birthday, with my 10th birthday money, I went into a record store, a CD store, and I bought 3 CDs. I don't remember what the third one was. I remember the second one was that tribute to Miles with basically the second great quintet, but with Wallace Roney on trumpet.
Oh, yep.
And then the one that changed my life was Dave Brubeck's Time Out. And I put that in the CD player, and it wasn't Blue Rondo a la Turk, and it wasn't Take 5. It was the intro to Strange Meadowlark, the second track. And it's a feeling I've had a couple of times throughout my life where it just felt like Dave Brubeck reached through my speakers and grabbed me by the shoulders. And I was like, there's a pre-Time Out time in my life and there's a post timeout in my life. And I was done. I was totally converted. And so from the age of 10, 11, I was in full on jazz snob mode, and I switched teachers to that. The teacher I was with at that time took me as far as she could and said to my parents, he should find a teacher that's more specialized in jazz than I am. And so I started studying with the only jazz teacher at the Royal Conservatory of Music in Toronto. And he, really, really shaped my playing and turned me on to stuff. So I credit him, named George Thurgood, not the blues guitar player George Thurgood.
I assume not.
No. But he brought me into a place where I could, hang at a jazz jam session at the age of 14. And so the Rex, they still do it, I believe. They had jam sessions on Tuesday nights. And at the time, the Rex was not licensed as a bar. It was licensed as a restaurant. So if you were under 19, which is the drinking age in Ontario, you could get in, like if you had a parental supervision or whatever. And so my dad would drive me down on Tuesday nights to the jam session at the Rex. And I had gotten the name of who the manager was. And I knew they did Saturday solo piano matinees. Yeah, so I went to a jam session at the Rex and I was 14. And I played a couple of tunes, and I think everyone, because I had gray hair even when I was 14, so I didn't look 14. I looked like I could have been a university student, 19 or 20 or whatever. And so, I could play decently, and so that's how I met the manager, and I started playing, once every 2 months at the Rex at the age of 14.
And do you remember those first couple of performances, what impact they had on you? I mean, obviously everyone's nervous, but do you just remember what it was like for you?
I wasn't nervous. It was just kind of like, okay, I have 2 sets and I get to play the music I like, and I get to work on things and, pick a few tunes that I've always wanted to learn or that I've been learning, working on with my teachers, and I get to work it out, in public. I mean, I came up doing the Royal Conservatory of Music. They had what they call lobby concerts, I think once a month, or it may have even been once a week. And all the students got to showcase whatever they were working on at the time. So to me, it didn't really feel that much different than a lobby concert from the RCM, except I got a little bit of money after it.
So it seems self-evident to me, but please feel free to correct me, David. But with that passion and the love of playing at that age, I know you studied jazz at university. So that was always the case from that time onwards, or was there a little bit of a wrangle about whether you should have, in quotation marks, a real job?
There was definitely a discussion with my family. Yeah, they were always very supportive of me being a musician, I think, up until money became a question. But I knew from the age of 13, 14 that I was going to be a musician. There was kind of not that much of a question. In the intervening years, I had done like jazz camps, and, I was kind of on, I guess, what most people would consider to be the path of studying jazz and becoming a jazz musician, or a musician in general. And I remember, my senior year of high school, and I went and did auditions and I went and made all the applications. It came down to moving to Montreal to go to McGill in jazz, going to York University in Toronto in political science on a full scholarship. My mom was like, you realize that if you move to Montreal, that you are turning down a free ride. You are aware of that. And we had a very, serious discussion. They weren't talking me out of it. I think they just wanted to be 100% convinced that I was 100% convinced. And I was, and we moved to Montreal. They moved back. My parents are from Montreal, actually, both of them. And so when I got into McGill, they decided to move back. They were no longer happy in Toronto either. And so my getting into McGill was their excuse to move back.
Tell us about those years at university, David. Like that was at 3 years at McGill?
4 years at McGill.
4 years.
2002 to 2006. I was young because I got out of high school young as well. So it was a little bit intense. Especially my first year, I studied with a professor named Jan Jarczyk, who unfortunately is no longer with us. And he came up through the, Polish conservatory system and then studied at Berkeley. So he definitely suffered no fools. And, showing up for a lesson at 10 a.m. on whatever day, and he would lock the door at 10:01 and be like, scales, 4 octaves, go. And, I feel like I should have flipped the order with which I studied with people, because I did 1 year with Jan, and then I did 3 years with a pianist and composer named Jeff Johnston, who I credit entirely with rebuilding my playing. I remember my first lesson with Jeff, and he was like, play me something. And I played, I don't know, Body and Soul or some ballad. And he's like, and I remember to this day, I remember what he said to me. He's like, you have great ideas, but your technique is shit. and Jeff single-handedly rebuilt my technique. And working with Jeff was fantastic because at the time, the faculty at McGill has changed greatly since, the time of my undergrad. But at the time, he was one of the few people there in terms of staff, faculty, who was versatile enough to welcome everything that I brought to him, whether it was straight ahead, acoustic jazz, or whether it was R&B, or when I started getting into more avant-garde, experimental, whatever you want to call, players like Paul Bley, players like Cecil Taylor, kind of trying to, I remember my final year of university, I just wanted to go like all into Paul Bley and Ornette and that kind of music. And I had no idea that he was so at ease and so familiar with that music. So he just ate it up and gave me tons of things to look at. Or I remember going to see Chick Corea solo at Jazz Fest over the summer. And in that show, he played one of the Scriabin preludes or etudes, maybe. I don't remember at this point. And so I went and found one of the preludes and I brought it in, and Jeff was super game to tackle that music as well. So I count myself very lucky to have had a teacher like that in such a formative time of my life. And also I was incredibly lucky that like my cohort of students, we all encouraged each other and pushed each other, and we all did crazy projects that we didn't do for any kind of credit, but we just had access to space and we all wanted to play, and we were all young and hungry and motivated, and we did all kinds of crazy things that a couple of years after I graduated from McGill, that was not the energy among the student body. So I got very lucky in the group of people that I was around at the time.
Yeah. And just, I want to go back to, and it's not often that we talk about technique, but when you were told you've got some great ideas, but your technique is shit, what were the specifics, without going into huge depth, of why your technique needed remedying?
My posture was crap. I was tripping over my own fingers. So it's one thing to develop technique if you're playing written music and you learn how to properly play whatever piece that you're given. But if you're improvising and you're trying to execute ideas, I would say that the technique is necessarily different, because you're not just relying on having to execute the same thing over and over again. You have to, your fingers have to be as fast as your brain and your ears. And so my fingers were not as fast as my brain and my ears. And so it was kind of about getting all three of those things to the same caliber, the same level. I think that's what Jeff was aiming for, and he just showed me some just basic things about scale fingering, and if I made that YouTube video a few weeks ago about the chicken wing. I wasn't doing chicken wing so much, but I was exerting more energy than I had to when I was crossing over in scales. And he did this exercise. I can't move the camera to show it on the piano, but I do it with my students now. And he's like, this is going to sound dumb, but just sit at the piano and like move your arms naturally. And he's like, that's how it should feel when you play. When you're sitting at a desk and you need to you need to grab your mouse, or you need to type, or you need to do whatever, there's none of this extraneous motion that everyone seems to do when they sit at a piano. And he was like, you don't need to do it. Here are some things to think about. Here are some things to pay attention to in your body when you're playing. And yeah, he just rebuilt my technique.
No, that's great. And so, what were the most memorable projects to you at university where you're going, okay, I think I can at least try to make a living with this, and building those networks?
I mean, my first band started in university. It was my university combo, which it later became known. We started calling it Indagon Trio. And that's the band with which I made my first record. And that was with a bass player named Alex Mallet, who now lives in Kansas City. He's from Kansas City and he moved back. A drummer named Liam O'Neill, who is still in Montreal and plays more kind of indie rock music. He plays in a band called Suns, Suuns. And when we started, because you couldn't have a trio as a university credit combo, we had a saxophonist named John Lindhorst, who has just moved back to Montreal. He spent a lot of time in Berlin. And then John was a little bit older than us, so he kind of had other projects and other things. So he left, but Alex, Liam, and I stayed as a trio. And yeah, that was kind of the primary project. Alex and I were very close collaborators throughout our entire university career. I'm trying to remember other things like from my undergrad days. I mean, primarily I associate my undergrad with that band, with Indagon.
Yeah.
And, that's where I remember our final advanced arranging project was to write for rhythm section and string orchestra. And I had a hell of a time choosing which song I wanted to do. And so I just decided, well, I'll arrange them all. And because there's a recital hall at McGill that at the time wasn't totally overbooked and, had availability to book for non-credit performances, I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to book the recital hall, and I'm going to write all the arrangements of all the tunes I wanted to do. The impetus, because I've done a fair amount of writing for strings over the years, and that was the impetus to start taking it on and really dive into it. I love writing for strings, and I just love the sound of having real string players play your parts back at you for the first time. It's a really phenomenal feeling. So that my writing for strings stems from my final advanced arranging assignment.
So I thought it'd be worth jumping around different projects you've been involved with, and diverse is an understatement. And I won't necessarily do these in a chronological order, but before we start that, I want to ask you, do you have a South American heritage or background? And I get you'll get why I'm asking that, but is there a reason for your particular passion in that area as far as Brazilian jazz and so on?
I mean, I can pinpoint when it happened. That's what I was going to bring up. So in the summer between my third and fourth year of undergrad at McGill, there was a drummer that was around our orbit, a good friend and colleague of ours named Chris Driscoll, who sadly passed away. in a ski accident. And the last thing Chris had said to me before we went on winter break was, you should really apply to the Banff Center and we should play more. And those were the last things he said to me before he passed. And the Banff Center is an arts residency in Alberta, in the mountains, in the Rocky Mountains. It is renowned for its the workshop has changed names many times over the years. At the time, it was called the Workshop in Jazz and Creative Music. Now I think they call it Jazz and Sonic Arts. And Chris and a bunch of people from McGill had done it the year before. And Chris came back. Everyone I knew that came back from that particular year came back very energized and very motivated. I think in the past, people had told me about Banff and they said, oh, yeah, you should apply, kind of as a more general thing of like, you should think about applying. This is a really cool program. And Chris was just like the biggest evangelist for the Banff program of like, you have to apply and you have to go. And so, Chris's best friend, Chris was from Prince Edward Island in the Maritimes, and his childhood best friend, who was also at McGill at the time, his family chartered a bus to bring like 60 people from Montreal to Prince Edward Island for the funeral, and just to kind of be in community and to remember his life. And I wound up, when I got the news, that as soon as I got off the phone with Liam, I started hearing a melody in my head, and I wound up writing a song for Chris on the bus up out to Charlottetown, and we played it at the final concert. And that concert, I still remember. I mean, it's like almost 20 years ago, and I remember it to this day. Like, no one who was there, in my estimation, has ever played better. We came back like the night before or 2 nights before the deadline to apply to Banff. And I was already booked to play on somebody else's audition tape for it. And I said to him, he was also in Charlottetown at that time. And I said, hey man, can I just jump on your session? Can we do 3 of my tunes for the Banff audition? And we wound up both getting in, and we wound up being roommates when we went to Banff. And while I was at Banff in the summer of 2005, one of the other people out there is a pianist named Carrie Politzer, who lives in Portland, Oregon now. I went and saw her set at the club on site, the club at the Banff Center. And there was just this thing in her music that I couldn't place. Like, I couldn't identify it. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know where it was coming from, but I knew I really enjoyed it. And I asked her after her set, like, what are you listening to? Where is this influence coming from? And she said, oh yeah, I'm basically only listening to Brazilian pop music these days. And this is, 2005. So pre-iTunes, pre-YouTube, pre-everything, really. And so I asked her for a list of albums, lists of artists, whatever. And the main central library in Montreal has quite an extensive CD collection. And so when I came back, I just went down her list. And the first record I got that I found and that I listened to was by an artist named Javan. The first track I heard is a track called Tem Boi na Linha. There's an ox on the rail. There's an ox on the line. I speak Portuguese. I still don't understand that title. Intro of that song came on, and it was another one of those Dave Brubeck timeout moments, like literally even more viscerally than Strange Meadowlark. It really felt like Javan reached through my headphones and was like, welcome to the rest of your life, whether you like it or not, whether you know it or not. So it's been almost 20 years. I've just been continuously exploring everything that Brazil has to offer. And the more I discover, the more I realize that there's more to discover.
And so tell us about, and I get making a big assumption, but you did some touring, in your own words, a samba rock icon, and apologies if I mispronounce this, but Jorge Ben Jor?
Jorge Ben Jor.
Oh, Georgie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Tell us about that experience.
If I didn't have photo and video of it, I would still never believe it. So this was in 2013. What happened was I had booked myself a gig at New Blue in New York City in the Lower East Side. Build up to that is that I had spent a year studying in New York at a workshop, the BMI Jazz Composers Workshop. And every time I was there in New York, I would go either to New Blue or another club where the Brazilian musicians in New York were playing. And so I got to know the guys in the scene. And so August 2013, I was planning on taking another trip down to New York. And I just had the idea of emailing all these guys that I had met over the past few years of like, hey, I'm thinking of coming down in August. Are you guys going to be around? Could we organize a session, maybe organize a gig? And by happenstance and sheer luck, all these guys were off the road and available. So I wrote to the owner manager of New Blue and I said to him, you don't know who I am, but I've booked all your cats. Can we do the early set on the Wednesday I happened to be in New York because New Blue did Brazilian music on Wednesdays. And then I wrote to the artist who did the late show, Davi Vieira, who's a great singer and percussionist. And I said, hey, Davi, I booked your band to do my set. So I can tell you they're available. And it was the bartender's birthday too. It was just like one big party. And so the saxophonist, Jorge Continentino, after we finished my set, it was not the best set. We hadn't rehearsed. The Rhodes that was at New Blue was in not great condition. I didn't really play my best, I didn't think. But Jorge Continentino introduced me to this man in sunglasses in a dark club who was also named Georgie. And he was speaking to me in kind of broken English. He was like, I really like how you play. I was like, oh, thank you very much. I didn't recognize who it was. And then Jorge Ben Jor went over to the other side of New Blue where all the lamps are. And I got a good look at his face. And I was like, oh, shit, that was Jorge Ben. Okay. And then I was like, okay, my life and career can end right now because Jorge Ben told me he likes how I play. I'm good. I'm good for life now. And then about a week later, so I wound up talking to the DJ from New Blue, a DJ named Greg Kaz. I wound up chatting with him. About a week later, I saw that Greg got tagged in a Facebook photo, a poster that said Jorge Ben one night only at BB King's New York in November of 2013. And so I wrote to him and I said, Greg, who's booking this US tour for Jorge Ben? I have contacts at the Montreal Jazz Festival. Let's try and add a Montreal date onto Jorge's tour. And Greg's response was like, oh yeah, I had dinner with Jorge the other night and he wanted me to ask you, can you do the entire tour? I was like, as a translator, as a PR person, like, what do you mean do the entire tour? He was like, he wants you to play piano in his band for the whole US run. And I was like, sign me up. So I wound up in November. We did Miami Beach, DC at the Howard Theater, New York at BB King's, and then 2 nights at Yoshi's San Francisco, which no longer exists. I was thrown into the deep end. I had no charts. I had no audio. I had no set list. And we had no rehearsal.
Wow.
My audition interview. So the gig at New Blue was my audition. And then at the time he was being managed by his wife. And I finally got a hold of her on the phone. And our conversation was literally, are you available? Yes. Do you know his music? Yes. Okay, great. See you in Miami. Bye. I was like, are we going to rehearse? I know his music, but he's got a 60-year career. I don't know all of the songs. And like, I don't. And so I went on YouTube and I just searched like Jorge Ben live 2012, I think, just to get a sense of like what the previous year's show was. And I made notes in my notebook, and I, showed up for sound check in Miami, and he says to me, "So what do you know?" And I showed him my 4 pages in my notebook, and I was like, "If you want to play anything else, just make sure I see your hands." Because given that I started on guitar, or took one guitar lesson, I don't know that you can say that I started on guitar, but I know enough about guitar that if I see their hands on the neck, I can cheat. I can figure out where they are. So yeah, that was definitely trial by fire. So we did the US run, and then the year after, like summer 2014, I was going to Brazil with another artist, and I wrote to Georgie and Georgie's wife, and I said, "Hey, I would love to just have coffee. Are you guys going to be around while we're in Brazil?" And his wife emailed me back, "Oh yeah, I meant to email you. Can you come with us to Tokyo on such and such a day?" So we wound up doing 3 nights, so 6 shows at Blue Note Tokyo.
How did you find, without veering off too much, how did you find Japan? That's another whole sphere, and
My God.
A lot of our listeners and viewers will know, Japan is a real connoisseur of jazz.
Jazz and Brazilian music. What I didn't know, I knew that the largest Japanese population outside of Japan is in Sao Paulo. I knew that. What I didn't know is that there's been a whole bunch of Brazilians or Japanese Brazilians who have returned to Nagoya. And so there would be a bunch of people at the end of every show speaking totally flawless Portuguese, and I was very confused. The connection between Brazil and Japan and Brazilian music in Japan is, yeah, I think you touched on it, that the Japanese audience in whatever community, whether it's hip hop or jazz or Brazilian music, they are aficionados and connoisseurs and almost obsessive in the best possible way. I mean, I remember there was one kid, he couldn't have been more than 25, and he bought tickets to all 6 sets and sat at the front row table for all 6 sets at like $100 a ticket, $100 a set. And Georgie's son, Gabriel, came to hang out, and he spotted this guy. He's like, "Okay, well, I'm bringing you backstage because you deserve it." I mean, I can't say that my experience, I've only been once, I've only been for that gig, and the hospitality of Blue Note Tokyo is second to none. It is the best venue I've ever played, I think. And they put you up in a phenomenal hotel, and there's a shuttle between the hotel and the club, and they pick you up in a BMW from the airport. And like, I mean, obviously my experience in Japan, and then on top of it, I'm playing with an icon. It's not like I'm going there with my own band or with a band that's lesser known. I'm going with someone who has a 60-year career and incredible notoriety. Like it's not the same experience at all. So I was very fortunate and very lucky, but it was absolutely unbelievable. Actually, funny side story. We went out in Shibuya, and we went to a guitar shop in Tokyo because inflation and the conversion and the import tax in Brazil is ridiculous for gear. So whenever those guys are on the road, the first place they go is a music shop in the Apple Store, because it's, even with the currency conversion, it's often cheaper for them to purchase whatever they want or need abroad rather than inside Brazil. And so we went to this guitar shop in Shibuya, and I'm in the keyboard section, and I'm away from them, and all of a sudden I hear, "David, help!" And the only person who spoke any English in that store was an Australian gentleman with the heaviest accent I have ever encountered. And so he was trying to tell them about, like, come back with your passports to avoid the import tax or the consumption tax. But he was trying to explain this to them in English, and their English is okay, but not great. And so I was there translating into Portuguese of what this guy was saying. And he was like, "Your English is really good for a Brazilian." I'm like, "Thanks. I'm Canadian."
That's great. Love that. Yeah, look, you can't beat a good broad Aussie accent.
Yeah.
No, that's brilliant, David. Thanks for sharing that. And so, just being aware of time, I'm going to cover two
Yeah.
other really fascinating pieces. So, tell us about your involvement with Haitian hip hop.
Yes. So I play with an artist named Vox Sambou, who is a Haitian rapper, songwriter, vocalist based in Montreal. I've played with him since the beginning of his solo career in 2010. It's just we have had the privilege of touring literally all over the planet with him. We've played in Beijing, we've played in Maputo, we've played across the US. We're going to Europe in March. We're doing the UK, Munich, and a couple of places in France. And it's just been a wild ride, seeing how his music connects with people and the opportunities we've gotten.
And what are you actually playing there, David? So tell us about your role within that outfit.
So I'm playing keyboards, and often I am also playing left-hand bass. When we don't tour with a bass player for budget reasons, I play left-hand bass. Vox is the things he listens to the most are the kick drum and the bass. And we had done a couple of gigs with other bass players, not the original founding bass player. And there were just certain details in the bass lines that sometimes they would overlook or not get, and it really affected Vox's flow as a rapper. And I started doing it. I did it out of necessity at our show in Beijing. Our original bass player couldn't make it because of the Chinese visa process. If the people whose names were not on the original visa application, you can't just sub somebody out.
No.
So we had a bass player on call, in case he would get his visa in time. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. So we land in Beijing and we go straight to the gig. I'm like, well, I have to figure this out. So on the fly, I basically played left-hand bass, and Vox liked it so much that when we did a European tour a few months after that, just to keep the band lean and mean, he asked me, do you mind playing left-hand bass for the entire 2-week run? And I did. Wow. So now that's become a thing.
And so I have to ask, you've already talked about Japan. It doesn't get, even though Japan and China are somewhat close geographically, they could not be two more different cultures. Tell us about briefly your thoughts about playing in China, Beijing, and just your experience, because it is a very opaque culture in a lot of ways.
It's a growing music market, and I think for music that the audience identifies with, it can be a really incredible, passionate market as well, but they don't respond to the same type of music as Japan. And I realize I'm speaking in generalizations, but we were playing what was primarily a rock festival or a rock showcase. It was primarily other Chinese artists, from what I recall. And so we were very much the odd ones out, and the reaction was very odd to us. Not hostile, I want to be clear, but just kind of, no. I don't think they knew what to make of us at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, a very, very different type of reception than in Tokyo, for sure.
No, really interesting. Yeah, I'd assume that, but yeah, it's interesting context. Thank you. And so I'm really fascinated by a third project you've been involved with, David, and that's the OctoEcho project. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so OctoEcho is the project led by the composer Katia Makdisi Warren, who also plays oud, and she's of mixed heritage. She's part French Canadian and part Lebanese, and under the OctoEcho umbrella, there are many, many different projects, and I'm part of the project called Transcestral, which is a group or a project that mixes Moroccan Sufi music with indigenous music, I guess what you would commonly call powwow music. But we kind of it changes every time because obviously with that many people, there's a lot of moving parts. A lot of the indigenous repertoire comes from the Buffalo Hat Singers in Ganawage, just outside of Montreal. We actually just did a gig last night, and one of the invited artists was a singer named Katia Rock, who I've never worked with before, and I don't know which indigenous community she is from, but we added her music to the mix, and it's when we do the full thing, it's I think like 17 artists on stage. There's like 3 percussionists and 2 oud players, including Katia, and different nai, flute, and kanun, and a whirling dervish dancer, and traditional indigenous ring dancer, Mohawk dancer. Really, it's a really fantastic project. I came on actually after the record was done. I came on in 2020. I was invited in to sub in, and I've kind of become one of the steady musicians in that particular project. And it's just, it's not a piano feature project at all because there's so much stuff happening, but it's just a really beautiful, moving set of repertoire, and I'm very grateful that I get to play it, every so often.
And I mean, bringing all those things together, David, into your own trio Bruxo, tell us about that. And obviously that scratches an itch, I imagine, creatively, in that you're, driving things, but just tell us briefly about that.
So Trio Bruxo also started not long after I finished my undergrad at McGill, and those are with 2 other musicians that I met at McGill. We were all studying at the same time, Nicolas Bédard on bass and Mark Nelson on drums, who grew up in New Zealand, actually. He was born in Calgary and grew up in New Zealand. And that whole project came about when I was discovering Brazilian music in the mid to late 2000s. I got turned on to a series of records by different piano trios, because up until that point, I had only heard vocal Brazilian music. A colleague of mine, a co-host on the radio station here in Montreal, CKUT, that I have been an active volunteer and host for the greater part of 20 years. We were co-hosting the World Music Show together, and she played the Milton Banana Trio, which is an instrumental Brazilian piano trio record. And I had never heard that group before. And so I kind of went down the rabbit hole of other Milton Banana records and other Brazilian piano trios from the same era, from the 60s and 70s, because I quickly realized with a little bit of Google searching and some of the not so legal MP3 download blogs of the era, pre-iTunes, pre-YouTube, that there was like a generation of instrumental Brazilian piano trios from the 60s, one of them being Tamba Trio and one of them being Zimbo Trio. And I came across the self-titled Zimbo Trio record from 1982. That was the first one that I heard. I just heard Nick and Mark in my head. It was another one of those visceral moments of like, okay, I need to put together a band that's going to play a different repertoire than what I'm hearing in the clubs in the Brazilian community at the time, 2005, 2006, 2008. If I was going to put together Zimbo Trio, those are the guys that sounded the closest to my ears. And so we started playing in 2009 and kind of just playing locally. And I had multiple people, including multiple Brazilians, tell me you need to go to Brazil and you need to go with this band. So there's a grant in Quebec. So the project that I pitched was to start creating an artist network between Montreal and Sao Paulo to really like create an infrastructure so that if people from Brazil wanted to come to Canada, we could be the rhythm section, and the soloist or the vocalist or whoever could just come, and to have a database of clubs and festivals to give these artists, and then to have the reciprocity in Sao Paulo of like an artist could invite us or an artist could invite another guest musician, and to have a database of clubs and venues and other musicians to connect with. So I took Bruxo in 2010, and we did 4 gigs in 7 days in Sao Paulo. That changed my life. And we got to see Zimbo Trio while we were there, actually. See and meet Zimbo Trio while we were there. So that changed everything. And that trip was the catalyst really to continue, because as we kind of mentioned earlier in the episode, I'm not Brazilian, I'm not Latinx. None of us in Trio Bruxo are. And so it was one thing to like be playing locally in Montreal at a time where the Brazilian community wasn't quite as big, and where the Brazilian repertoire that was being performed in town was a little bit more limited than it is now. Now the scene has changed entirely. But then going to Sao Paulo and the reaction we got in Sao Paulo gave me, I saw where we fit in the greater Brazilian community, even inside of Brazil, even in Sao Paulo. And so that was like, that gave me the direction of where I should take this band, where we could go with this band. And so we put out an independent EP in 2012. And then we kind of put the project on ice because all 3 of us got busy with other projects. I kind of put the band back together in 2018 when I went back for my master's, because there was this album, this type of music that I wanted to write that was just kind of lingering in the back of my head, and which was really trying to pick apart the music of Egberto Gismonti and specifically Hermeto Pascoal. So the band is named in honor of Hermeto Pascoal because Bruxo means sorcerer in Portuguese, and Hermeto is often referred to as the sorcerer. And if you've ever seen a photo of him, or if you've ever seen him live, or you've ever seen video of him, that will be very obvious why he is considered a sorcerer and magician. And I just wanted to really dive into not covering Hermeto tunes, but trying to write music in the same vein, I guess, as Hermeto, kind of taking those same influences and then recombining them in my own way. And so I went back, I did my master's at McGill, basically explicitly to develop that record, to develop that repertoire. And those guys were on board. They had already done their master's at McGill a couple of years prior to me. So they knew what the kind of the trajectory and the timeline would be. And so that album came out in 2019. Fantastic timing to launch a record. And then in 2020, despite what happened in 2020, one of the things that Quebec did that no other province in Canada did was that they allowed studios and theaters to be open for rehearsal. So you couldn't give performances, but you could record and you could workshop things. And there's a system of venues in Montreal called Maison de la Culture, or Houses of Culture, literally. And every neighborhood of Montreal has one. They turned over their space for residencies and for workshops. So we won a week in residency at one of the Maison de la Culture in the neighborhood called La Chine. And we went in every day from 9 till 3, 9 till 4. And we just worked on new music. I had been revisiting the work of Milton Nascimento over the lockdowns, over COVID. And without really giving it any thought, 2022 was the 50th anniversary of the album Clube da Esquina. For me, like, we had tackled Rio and Sao Paulo music. We had tackled music from the Northeast with the Bandeira do Bruxo record, but I've still never been to Minas Gerais, and we had never tackled that music, like the music from Milton and Toninho Horta and Lo Borges. We had never really tackled that music. And so that's the music, for whatever reason, that I was gravitating to in 2020. And so I brought in arrangements of those tunes and we kind of developed them more as a group. And I wound up also kind of, for every tune that I arranged, I tried to write like a piece that was an answer or a complement to the thing that we were arranging. So we developed this set of music that is recorded. We're still organizing the release plan, but it should hopefully be out this year.
Milton Nascimento has been mentioned by a previous guest as well. I mean, I understand how influential he is. So, yeah, looking forward to and your broader work. And long may the trio go strong. So we'd better jump into more of our traditional questions, David. Mm-hmm. So just briefly, because you've got that beautiful background, tell us a little bit about your favourite keyboards and what you've got there in your home studio.
This is not my home studio. This is a studio that I sublet from a friend of mine named Edwin DeGage, who's a fantastic keyboard player. He tours with U.S. Girls and Remy. He tours with Martha Wainwright. He tours with a whole bunch of different artists. So this is his space and this is all his gear. I just kind of come in here a few days a week.
Oh, that's fine. And tell us about your favourite keyboards then. Let's ignore that rubbish in the background and go for yours.
Well, I mean, the C3, anything Hammond, I would not deign to call myself a real Hammond player, but every time I get to sit behind one, I absolutely adore that experience. Just off camera, he has what is probably my favorite keyboard ever, which is the Fender Rhodes electric piano.
Yeah.
I don't have one of my own, but I absolutely adore those. And my own rig is a Nord Electro 5 laptop rig, which I know may be controversial to some of our listeners and readers, but I've been running laptops on stage since 2009 and have had very few issues with them.
So using Mainstage, Gig Performer, what's your sort of application of choice?
Mainstage with Native Instruments and Arturia and increasingly Yuhi, Diva and Rico.
Diva. Anyway, love that. Great. And then another traditional question is tagging a keyboard player. So someone out there, David, that you'd love to hear more about their career if we had the opportunity to talk to them.
Can I give you 3? Is that too many? So have you spoken to Ricky Pajot yet?
Ricky and I were in discussions a while back. I need to follow up with Ricky. So totally get Ricky, Madonna, and a whole bunch of other
Shaka
stuff.
Khan,
absolutely.
Christina Aguilera. Yeah. So he's from Montreal. He's from a dynasty of musicians here in Montreal. Really beautiful, brilliant family. So I would tag Ricky. I would tag a keyboard player named Camille Gélinas, who tours with Lisa Leblanc and is also in the house band for a TV show here in Quebec called Belle et Bum. She is an absolutely brilliant musician. She can play anything you throw at her and on acoustic piano and program the hell out of synths. She's absolutely phenomenal. And someone else in that vein is named David Osei-Afrifa, who is currently on tour with the vocalist Dominique Fils-Aimé. He's a multi-instrumentalist, producer, composer, amazing musician all around, player, and just I would love to hear more of his story.
Great. No, 3 great picks and noted. And then the dreaded Desert Island Discs question, David, 5 albums you couldn't live without.
Okay. Herbie Hancock Thrust.
Nice.
Stevie Wonder Inner Visions.
Beautiful.
Willie Colon and Ruben Blades Siembra.
Okay.
Javan Alumbramento. And the 5th. Ooh, the 5th one's tough. The 5th, I'm going to say Guillermo Klein and an album called Carrera.
Okay.
Yeah, those would be the 5.
There you go. You're giving me some great Google work to do. That's good. No, that's excellent.
Yeah.
I love it. So thank you. And that was one of the most efficient answers ever.
I've been thinking about it because I've heard the podcast. I knew this question was coming, so I've been thinking about it.
Yes. It's the number one stressful one. And then finally, the quick fire 10, David. So 10 questions with short and sharp answers.
All right.
I feel like you might have already answered this, but first album you ever heard?
First album I've ever heard was 50 Second
50
Street.
Second Street. Yeah.
No.
And just
The first one I ever heard was Neil Diamond, Hot August Night 2.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Classic. Yeah, absolutely. And just briefly, Billy Joel has a new song. What's your thoughts in 50 words or less?
I'm glad he's creating again. I'm not sure why there are 4 writers on it, but I'm glad he's creating again, and I hope there is more to come.
Absolutely. I second that motion. All right, we'll jump back in. Most important pre-gig ritual. What do you need to do to feel sort of set for it to play a gig?
A nap and... Sorry, I popped the P on that. A nap and coffee.
Good. Yeah, just that could be a good album name. If you hadn't been a musician, what do you think your career choice would have been? Well, I think you've sort of covered that. Would you have been a political staffer in the Canadian Parliament or an academic or something like that?
I'd probably have leaned more towards academia than actually going into politics.
Yeah.
I'm not really... It's so hard for me to say because I knew at such a young age that I was going to do this, that I kind of never gave any thought to anything else very much.
That's right. Now, given your skills and the diversity of your output, I'd be surprised if you use the transpose button very often. I assume it's more adjust on the fly.
Adjust on the fly.
Yep.
Yes, adjust on the fly.
If possible, favourite gig you've ever done?
Oh, that's actually an easy one. Relatively easy one. I said that and now maybe it's not. I will go with Vox Sambou at Rio das Ostras in 2019. Rio das Ostras is a town 3 hours outside of Rio de Janeiro, and they have a jazz and blues festival that's been running for 25 odd years. And we played there in 2019 in the out in a band shell beside the lagoon, and the whole structure was just vibrating.
It doesn't get much better than that, really, does it? Favorite city you've ever played? Maybe there.
Salvador da Bahia.
And then name a song that you used to love, but you've either played or listened to it to death, so you're not as big a fan anymore.
I'm going to say this, but I never really loved the song, is Girl from Ipanema.
Fair enough.
I can't. I just have a blockage. Like, I never want to hear bossa novas in English ever again. Yeah. I just don't want to hear it.
No, particularly given what you've experienced, I can totally understand. Favorite music, documentary or movie?
Summer of Soul.
And name one thing you'd like to see invented that would make your life as a keyboard player easier.
Better tuning system for grand pianos so that I could easily do it myself.
Yeah, actually, that's a great one. Yeah, being able to walk into a venue and actually do it. Yeah, that makes huge sense. Love it. And then what keeps you sane outside of music, David? What's your favourite non-musical activity or hobby?
I love being near water. I like just either walking down near waterfront or when I was growing up in Toronto, I used to take the ferry out to Toronto Island, and I love being on the water. I wish I was in a financial situation to have my own boat. That is not the case. But you know, just even in Montreal, walking down in the old city, which is on the waterfront, just going down there and park. I keep popping my P's. I'm sorry. You know, being on the waterfront or being in parks and just walking through the parks.
No, great answer. And look, one of the reasons we do this podcast, David, is to get insights into different musical genres and approaches than our own. And I can't think of anyone that's demonstrated more broadly how there is so much out there that particularly those of us in sort of US, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand that we just don't get to see. And to go from Beijing to Tokyo to South America and everything in between, let alone the diversity in the Canadian music scene, which I was already aware of, is just incredible. And I can't thank you enough for giving us a small glimpse into it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I love talking shop and talking music and sharing these stories and sharing this insight. So thanks for having me.
And there we have it. I do hope you enjoyed that interview. As I said in the intro, what a diverse and fascinating career. We always encourage people to check the show notes But this would be one I'd highly encourage you to check out in particular, because we'll be linking to all of those fascinating acts, genres, and countries. And also, David has his own YouTube channel where he does some really great education videos. And he mentioned the chicken wing video. There's so much more in there. Definitely check out David's channel, which will be linked to in the show notes. So that'll do us for this episode. Just a quick shout out to our gold and silver supporters. Brother Paul Brown. We couldn't do it without you, Brother Paul. Brother Paul's having some huge success with the Brothers Brown album, getting lots of attention and critical acclaim. And then before he hits the road with the Waterboys again during 2024. Tammy Catcher from Tammy's Musical Stew, a very valued supporter and long-term supporter. Thank you so much, Tammy. To Radio Grande, a YouTube channel devoted to funk reimaginings of some classic songs. Do check out Radio Grande. To Dave Bryce and the team at the musicplayer.com forums. Keyboard Corner has been around for decades, and it's for a reason. It's a quality source of information. And last but not least, Mike at midnightmastering.com, where if you want good priced, high quality mixing and mastering services for your own work, Mike's the guy to talk to. Do check out Midnight Mastering. We'll leave it there. You can always touch base with us at editor@keyboardchronicles.com or on our Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Threads, you name it. Just search for the Keyboard Chronicles on each of those platforms, and we're there and we post regularly and love interacting with you. Thanks for all your support and for listening or watching, and we'll see you back next episode.